The morning sun beat down hard on the dusty courtyard behind the big white house. Thomas wiped sweat from his forehead and checked his pocket again. $2. That was all he had left in the world. His blacksmith shop was failing, and he desperately needed help to keep it running. Around him, wealthy plantation owners gathered in their finest clothes, talking loudly about their plans. These men had deep pockets and strong opinions about what they wanted. Thomas felt out of place in his worn work clothes and patched boots. He wasn't like them at all. The auctioneer, a heavy man with a booming voice, stood on a wooden platform. He called out numbers and descriptions while people raised their hands to bid. Thomas watched as strong young men were sold for hundreds of dollars. The wealthy buyers competed fiercely, driving prices higher and higher. Then something changed. In the crowd's mood, the auctioneer's voice lost its excitement. Next up, we have a young woman about 16 years old. She can do basic household work, but he paused and shook his head. Well, you can see for yourself. A girl was led onto the platform. She walked with a noticeable limp, favoring her left leg. Her simple dress was clean but faded. What struck Thomas most were her eyes. While other people on the platform looked defeated or scared, this girl held her head up. Her dark eyes moved across the crowd with intelligence and dignity. She had an accident as a child, the auctioneer explained. Broke her leg badly. It never healed right. She can't do heavy field work or move quickly. Starting bid is 50 cents. Silence fell over the crowd. The wealthy men looked uninterested. One laughed and said, "What uses damaged goods?" Another shook his head and turned away completely. Thomas found himself studying the girl more closely. Something about her reminded him of his late wife, Catherine. Not her appearance, but the way she carried herself. Catherine had always said you could tell a lot about people by looking in their eyes. This girl's eyes showed strength, not weakness. "Do I hear 50 cents? The auctioneer called out, sounding bored. More silence. The girl's chin lifted slightly. Higher. Thomas could see she understood exactly what was happening. She knew these people saw her as worthless. But she wasn't broken inside, despite what they thought. 25 cents? The auctioneer tried again. A few men chuckled. "Even that's too much," someone called out. "What's she going to do, hobble around the kitchen?" Thomas felt anger rise in his chest. These people were talking about a human being, like she was a broken tool. He thought about his empty shop and his dwindling savings. He needed someone who could help with simple tasks, keep records, maybe assist customers. This girl looked intelligent enough for that kind of work. "I'll bid $2, Thomas said, raising his hand. The crowd turned to stare at him. For a moment, complete silence filled the courtyard. Then the laughter started. It began as quiet chuckling but grew louder and more mocking. $2 whole for the crippled girl?" One man howled. "You might as well throw your money in the river." "Thomas has lost his mind," another added. "That's more than she's worth by 10 times. The auctioneer looked surprised, but pleased. "I have $2. Do I hear any other bids?" The laughter continued. "Let him have her," someone shouted. "It's his funeral." Going once, going twice. "Sold to Thomas for $2. As the crowd's attention moved to the next person being auctioned, Thomas approached the platform to complete his purchase. The girl watched him approach. Up close, he could see she was evaluating him just as carefully as he had studied her. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Elena," she replied. Her voice was soft but clear. "I'm Thomas. I run a blacksmith shop in town. The work won't be too hard, mostly helping customers and keeping things organized." She nodded once. "I can do that." As they walked away from the auction, Thomas heard more comments from the crowd behind them. "Poor fool doesn't know what he's gotten himself into. $2 down the drain. She'd probably collapse on the walk to town." Thomas ignored them, but he noticed Elena's jaw tighten. She was listening too. Despite her limp, she kept pace with him without complaint. Her legs might be uneven, but her spirit seemed perfectly strong. The walk to his shop took about 30 minutes. Elena didn't ask to rest or slow down. She looked around with interest, taking in the buildings and streets. Thomas found himself curious about what she was thinking. His blacksmith shop sat at the edge of the main street. It wasn't much to look at from the outside. The wooden building needed paint, and weeds grew around the entrance. Inside, tools hung on every wall, and a large forge dominated one corner. Everything was clean and organized, but the space felt empty and quiet. "This is it," Thomas said. Feeling a bit embarrassed about the shop's modest appearance, Elena stepped inside and looked around carefully. She ran her fingers along the workbench and examined the tools. "You keep everything very neat," she observed. "My wife always said a messy shop means messy thinking," Thomas replied. "She died 2 years ago. Since then, I've been trying to manage everything alone," Elena nodded sympathetically. "It's hard to do everything by yourself." Thomas showed her around the small living space behind the shop. There was a main room with a kitchen area, one bedroom, and a small storage room. "You can sleep in the storage room," he said. "I'll move the extra supplies somewhere else." "Thank you," Elena said simply. That evening, as Thomas prepared a simple dinner, he watched Elena organize the storage room. Despite her limp, she moved efficiently, creating neat piles and clear pathways. She had a system for everything. "Where did you learn to organize like that?" he asked. "My grandmother taught me," Elena replied. "She said if you can't move fast, you better move smart." Thomas smiled at that wisdom. Maybe those people at the auction had been wrong about what made someone valuable. Maybe he hadn't wasted his $2 after all. As night fell, Thomas lay in his bed thinking about the day. The other buyers had focused on what Elena couldn't do. They saw only her limp and assumed she was useless. But Thomas was beginning to suspect they had missed something important. In the storage room, Elena was thinking too. She had watched Thomas during the auction. While other men laughed at her, he had looked at her face, not her leg. He had seen her as a person, not just damaged property. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, both Thomas and Elena felt something they hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The next morning, Thomas woke up before sunrise, just like he had every day for the past 20 years. The forge needed to be lit early, and customers would start arriving by 8 o'clock. He quietly started his morning routine, trying not to wake Elena in the storage room. But when he stepped into the main shop area, he found Elena already awake, sitting on a wooden stool near the cold forge. She was examining his tools with careful attention, turning each one over in her hands. "You're up early," Thomas said, surprised. "I wanted to understand how everything works," Elena replied. "I've never been inside a blacksmith shop before." Thomas lit the forge and began heating it up for the day's work. "Most people think blacksmithing is just hitting hot metal with a hammer," he explained. "But there's a lot more to it than that." Elena nodded, watching him work. "My grandmother used to say that every trade has secrets that only show themselves to people who really look." As the fire grew hotter, Thomas started working on a set of horseshoes that needed to be finished by afternoon. He expected Elena to retreat to a safe distance, like most people did when they saw the sparks flying. Instead, she moved closer, studying his technique. "The metal changes color when it gets hot enough," she observed. "You're watching for a specific shade of orange." Thomas paused, surprised by her attention to detail. "That's right. Too hot and the metal becomes weak. Not hot enough and it won't shape properly." "It's like cooking," Elena said thoughtfully. "My grandmother taught me that timing and temperature matter more than strength." "Something about her," comment made Thomas curious. "What else did your grandmother teach you?" Elena hesitated, as if deciding whether to trust him with the information. She knew about plants and medicines, how to help people when they got sick or hurt. "She taught me to read the signs in nature." "She taught you to read?" Thomas asked, trying to keep the surprise out of his voice. Most enslaved people weren't allowed to learn reading and writing. "Yes," Elena said quietly. "She said knowledge was the one thing nobody could take away from you, even if they took everything else." Over the next few hours, Thomas discovered that Elena was unlike anyone he had expected. When customers came into the shop, she greeted them politely and remembered their names after hearing them just once. She kept track of orders in her head with perfect accuracy. Around midday, Mrs. Patterson came in to pick up some repaired pots. She was known for being difficult to please and had a sharp tongue for anyone who disappointed her. "Thomas, I hope these pots are done right this time," she said in her stern voice. "Last blacksmith I used nearly ruined my best cooking pot." Elena stepped forward before Thomas could respond. Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Thomas repaired the small crack in the bottom and reinforced the handle where it was coming loose. The pot should be stronger now than when it was new. Mrs. Patterson examined the pot carefully, turning it over in her hands. "Well, I'll be," she said, sounding impressed. "This is excellent work. How did you know exactly what was wrong with it?" "I watched Mr. Thomas examine it yesterday," Elena explained. "He has a good eye for seeing problems that aren't obvious at first." After Mrs. Patterson left, clearly satisfied, Thomas looked at Elena with new respect. "You handled that well. She's not easy to please." People usually feel better when they know someone has paid attention to their concerns, Elena said. As the day continued, Thomas noticed more things about Elena that surprised him. Despite her limp, she moved around the shop with efficiency, never wasting motion. She couldn't lift heavy pieces of metal, but she could organize tools, tend the fire, and assist with detailed work that required steady hands. Most impressive was her memory. When Thomas mentioned that he needed to order more iron rod from the supplier in Atlanta, Elena said, "You ordered 12 pieces last time, but you used 14. Should we order 16 this time?" Thomas stopped what he was doing. "How do you know how much I used?" "I counted the pieces when I was organizing yesterday, and I watched how many you used today." Patterns tell you what's coming next. That afternoon, a farmer named Mr. Wilson brought in a broken plow blade. It was a complicated repair that would require reshaping the metal and welding it back together. "This is going to take some time," Thomas told him. "The metal is cracked in 2 places, and I'll need to heat it very carefully to avoid making it brittle." Elena studied the broken blade. "Mr. Wilson, what kind of soil do you usually plow with this?" "Rocky ground, mostly," the farmer replied. "Why do you ask?" "The crack pattern suggests the metal has been under stress for a while. If Mr. Thomas adds a reinforcement strip along the back edge, it should handle rocky soil better." Thomas looked at the blade again, seeing what Elena had noticed. She was right. The crack showed signs of repeated stress, not just a single break. "That's a good idea," Thomas said. "It'll cost a little more for the extra metal, but the blade will last much longer." Mr. Wilson agreed to the modification, and Thomas began a complex repair. As he worked, Elena assisted by maintaining the fire temperature and organizing tools so they were ready when needed. "You learn fast," Thomas commented, as Elena handed him exactly the right hammer without being asked. "I like to understand how things work," Elena replied. "When you understand the purpose behind each step, the work makes sense." By evening, Thomas realized that his most productive day in months had been possible because of Elena's help. She hadn't done any heavy lifting, but she had made everything else run more smoothly. As they cleaned up the shop, Elena said, "Mr. Thomas, I noticed that some of your tools are showing wear. If we sharpen them and oil the handles, they'll work better and last longer." "You're right," Thomas admitted. "I've been putting off maintenance because I was always too busy with customer work. What if I took care of tool maintenance in the evenings? That way, everything would be ready for the next day's work." Thomas considered this offer. It made perfect sense, but it also meant giving Elena more responsibility than he had originally planned. "You'd be willing to do that?" "I want the shop to succeed," Elena said simply. "When the business does well, everyone benefits." That night, as Thomas watched Elena carefully cleaning and organizing tools, he thought about the auction. Those men who had laughed at his purchase had been completely wrong. They had seen only Elena's limp and assumed it defined her abilities, but Elena's real strength wasn't in her legs. It was in her mind, her memory, and her natural understanding of how things worked. She saw patterns that others missed and remembered details that others forgot. Thomas began to realize that his $2 investment might turn out to be the smartest business decision he had ever made. The girl that everyone had dismissed as worthless was already proving to be invaluable. As Elena worked, she was thinking too. For the first time in years, she felt like her abilities mattered. Thomas didn't just tolerate her presence. He actually valued her contributions. Maybe, just maybe, this place could become something more than just survival. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, both Thomas and Elena felt something growing between them that neither had expected, a real partnership built on mutual respect. 3 months had passed since the auction, and Thomas's blacksmith shop had transformed completely. Word was spreading through town that the quality of work had improved, and more importantly, customers were actually enjoying their visits to the shop. Elena had developed her own way of moving around the forge that worked perfectly with her limp. She had created a system of stools and platforms that let her reach everything she needed without straining. Thomas watched in amazement as she glided from task to task, often more efficiently than he had ever managed on his own. "Elena, how do you always know exactly what I need next?" Thomas asked one morning as she handed him the perfect-sized hammer before he had even thought about which one to use. "I watch the way you look at the metal," she explained. "Your eyes tell me whether you're planning to shape, flatten, or curve. Each job needs different tools." But Elena's real gift showed itself with the customers. She had an incredible ability to remember not just their names, but their stories, their preferences, and their problems. When old Mr. Fletcher came in with his walking cane that kept breaking, Elena didn't just watch Thomas repair it again. She studied how Mr. Fletcher walked and where the stress points were hitting the cane. "Mr. Fletcher," she said gently, "the cane keeps breaking because it's hitting the ground at the wrong angle for your height. If Mr. Thomas shortens it by 2 inches and adds a rubber tip, it should last much longer." Thomas had repaired that same cane 4 times, but had never thought about why it kept breaking. Elena's observation solved the problem that had been frustrating both Thomas and Mr. Fletcher for months. "Young lady, you've got a sharp eye," Mr. Fletcher said, clearly impressed. "That makes perfect sense." After he left with his improved cane, Thomas shook his head in wonder. "How did you figure that out?" "My grandmother always told me to look for the cause, not just fix the effect," Elena replied. "Problems usually happen for a reason." Elena's knowledge of plants and herbs also proved invaluable in unexpected ways. When Mrs. Chen brought in some garden tools, Elena noticed rust forming in unusual patterns. "Mrs. Chen, are you growing anything new in your garden this year?" Elena asked. "Yes, I'm trying some vegetables my cousin brought from China," Mrs. Chen replied. "Why do you ask?" "The rust pattern on your tools suggests the soil has different minerals than what they're used to. If you clean them with vinegar and coat them with a light oil after each use, they should resist the rust better." Mrs. Chun followed Elena's advice, and when she returned the next month, her tools looked almost new despite heavy use. Thomas began to understand that Elena saw connections that other people missed. She didn't just help with the blacksmithing work. She helped solve the real problems that brought customers to their shop. Business was growing so well that Thomas made a decision that surprised even himself. One evening, as they were closing up the shop, he pulled out a small wooden box from under the counter. "Elena, I want to show you something," he said. Inside the box were the shop's earnings from the past month. It was more money than Thomas had made in any 3 months before. Elena arrived. "The business is doing better than it has in years," Thomas said. "That's because of your help. I think you should share in the success." He counted out a portion of the money and handed it to Elena. "This is your share of what we earned together." Elena stared at the money in disbelief. "Mr. Thomas, I don't understand. You're not just helping me anymore," Thomas explained. "You're making the business better. That makes you a partner, not just a worker." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak for a long moment. "Nobody has ever treated me like this before," she finally said. "Well, they should have," Thomas replied firmly. "You've earned every penny of this." From that day forward, Elena took even more interest in the business. She started keeping detailed records of what customers ordered, when they ordered it, and what problems they faced. Soon she could predict what supplies they would need weeks in advance. "Mr. Thomas, we're going to run out of horseshoe nails next Tuesday," she announced one morning. "How do you know that?" Thomas asked. Elena showed him her carefully organized ledger. "I tracked how many we use each day and checked our current supply. Also, 3 farmers mentioned they'll be bringing horses in for new shoes this week." Her prediction was exactly right. By keeping careful records and watching patterns, Elena helped them avoid running out of supplies or ordering too much. Elena also started suggesting improvements to the shop layout. "If we move the tool rack closer to the forge, you'll save steps during each project," she proposed. "And if we create a display area for finished work, customers can see examples of quality before they place orders." Thomas implemented all of her suggestions, and each one made the work flow more smoothly, but the biggest change was in how the townspeople saw Elena at first. Many had been suspicious or dismissive. The woman with a limp who had cost only $2 couldn't possibly be important, they thought. However, as word spread about the improved service and quality at Thomas's shop, people began to notice Elena's contributions. Customers specifically asked for her input on their projects. They trusted her judgment and valued her advice. Dr. Hayes, the town physician, became particularly interested in Elena's knowledge of plants and healing. When he learned about her grandmother's teachings, he began asking her questions about natural remedies. "Elena, do you know anything about plants that help with joint pain?" he asked one day. "My grandmother used willow bark tea," Elena replied. "She said the same thing that makes it bitter also takes away pain and swelling." Dr. Hayes was impressed. "That's exactly right. The active ingredient in willow bark is similar to what we use in modern pain medicines." Soon, Dr. Hayes was regularly consulting with Elena about traditional remedies. He even started recommending that patients visit the blacksmith shop to ask Elena about herbal treatments. Thomas watched all of this with growing pride and amazement. The girl that auction crowd had dismissed as worthless was becoming one of the most respected people in town. One evening, as they were working late to finish a large order, Elena said something that surprised Thomas. "Mr. Thomas, I need to tell you something important." Thomas looked up from his work, concerned by her serious tone. "When you bought me at that auction, I was planning to run away at the first opportunity," Elena admitted. "I thought you were just another person who saw me as property." Thomas stopped hammering and gave her his full attention. "But you never treated me like property," Elena continued. "You saw what I could do instead of what I couldn't do. You made me feel valuable for the first time in my life." "Elena, you are valuable," Thomas said firmly. "Anyone who can't see that is blind." "I want you to know that I'm not staying because I have to anymore," Elena said. "I'm staying because I choose to. This shop, this work, this partnership we've built, it means everything to me." Thomas felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't experienced since his wife died. Elena had become more than a business partner. She had become family. Looking back at those people who had laughed at his $2 purchase, Thomas knew they still didn't understand what real value looked like. But that was their loss. Elena's worth couldn't be measured in dollars, and her contributions went far beyond what anyone could have imagined. As they finished their work that night, both Thomas and Elena knew they had built something special. Together, trust, respect, and partnership had grown from the most unlikely beginning, proving that wisdom and judgment often come in unexpected packages. 6 months after the auction, Thomas's blacksmith shop had become the busiest in the county. Customers traveled from neighboring towns just to experience the quality and service that Thomas and Elena provided together. But with success came something neither of them had expected: jealousy from their competitors. Benjamin Wells owned the largest blacksmith operation on the other side of town. For 15 years, he had dominated the local metalworking business. His shop employed 3 workers and served most of the wealthy plantation owners in the area. But lately, those same customers had started taking their business to Thomas instead. Wells couldn't understand how a small, one-man shop could compete with his established business. What frustrated him most was hearing customers praise not just The work quality, but the intelligence and helpfulness of Thomas's assistant. It doesn't make sense, Wells complained to his workers. How can that little shop do better work than we do? And what's all this talk about the crippled girl giving advice? She's just property, not a craftsman. But Elena was becoming much more than Wells wanted to admit. Her reputation for solving problems and understanding customer needs was spreading. Throughout the region. It was on a particularly busy Tuesday morning that Elena first noticed something wasn't right with Thomas. He had been working on a complex iron gate for the courthouse, a prestigious project that would showcase their skills to the entire town. "Mr. Thomas, are you feeling well today?" Elena asked, watching him carefully. Thomas paused in his hammering and wiped his forehead. "I'm fine, just a little tired. We've been working long hours lately." But Elena's trained eye, sharpened by years of watching for signs of trouble, noticed more than simple fatigue. Thomas seemed slightly unsteady on his feet, and his usual precise movements were just a fraction slower than normal. "When did you last eat?" she asked. "I had breakfast this morning," Thomas replied, but he seemed uncertain about the timing. Elena made a mental note to watch him more carefully. Her grandmother had taught her that small changes in a person's behavior often meant bigger problems were coming. Over the next few days, Elena observed other concerning signs. Thomas complained of a strange metallic taste in his mouth that wouldn't go away. He occasionally seemed confused about simple tasks he had done thousands of times before. Most worrying, he had developed a slight tremor in his hands that made detailed work more difficult. "Maybe you should see Dr. Hayes," Elena suggested one afternoon when Thomas had to stop work because of dizziness. "I'm probably just working too." "Hard," Thomas said, sitting down heavily on his stool. "Business has been so good that I've been pushing myself to keep up with all the orders." Elena wasn't convinced. She had seen her grandmother diagnose illnesses by watching for patterns in symptoms. The combination of Thomas's problems seemed familiar, but she couldn't quite place why. That evening, Elena decided to do some investigating. She carefully examined everything in Thomas's daily routine, looking for anything that might cause his symptoms. She checked their food supplies, their water source, and even the air quality in the shop. Nothing seemed obviously wrong, but Elena's instincts told her to keep looking. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Benjamin Wells walked into their shop with a friendly smile and a small bag in his hands. "Thomas, my friend," Wells called out cheerfully, "I brought you some of my wife's special coffee blend. She insists it's the best in the county." Elena watched this interaction with interest. Wells had never visited their shop before, and his sudden friendliness seemed suspicious. "That's very kind of you, Benjamin," Thomas replied, though he seemed surprised by the gesture. "Nonsense," Wells said, waving off Thomas's thanks. "We're all craftsmen here. We should support each other. Here, let me make you a cup right now." Wells insisted on preparing the coffee himself, using his own supplies and taking charge of the entire process. He chatted pleasantly while he worked, asking about business and complimenting the improvements Thomas had made to his shop. "You've certainly done well for yourself," Wells said, glancing around. "Though I have to say I'm impressed by how much help you're getting from your assistant here." Elena noticed that Wells's smile didn't reach his eyes when he looked at her. There was something cold and calculating in his expression that made her uncomfortable. "Elena has been invaluable," Thomas said proudly. "I couldn't run this place without her." "I'm sure," Wells replied, but his tone suggested he didn't really believe it. After Wells left, Thomas drank the coffee and complimented its rich flavor. But Elena noticed that within an hour of finishing the cup, Thomas's symptoms seemed worse. His hands shook more noticeably, and he had to sit down twice during routine tasks. Over the following weeks, Wells began visiting their shop regularly, always bringing coffee and always insisting on preparing it himself. He claimed he enjoyed talking with fellow craftsmen and sharing ideas about their trade. Thomas appreciated these visits, seeing them as a sign that his success was earning him respect from established businessmen. But Elena grew more worried with each visit. She noticed that Thomas's symptoms always seemed to worsen after Wells's visits. The pattern was subtle but consistent. After drinking Wells's coffee, Thomas would experience increased dizziness, confusion, and weakness. Elena began keeping detailed notes about Thomas's condition, just as she tracked business patterns. She recorded when symptoms appeared, how severe they were, and what Thomas had eaten or drunk before they started. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Every time Wells visited and made coffee, Thomas got sicker. Elena's grandmother had taught her about poisons found in nature. Some plants could make people sick slowly, over time, so that the illness looked natural. But Elena had also learned that some minerals and metals could do the same thing. My grandmother once told me about a metal that could make people sick. If they took small amounts over many days, Elena thought to herself, what does she call it? Arsenic. It causes confusion, weakness, and a metallic taste. Thomas's symptoms matched perfectly. Elena felt a chill of fear as she realized what might be happening. If Wells was poisoning Thomas, it meant her life was in danger too. A successful partnership between a white blacksmith and an intelligent black woman challenged everything Wells believed about how the world should work, but Elena also knew that accusing a respected white businessman of attempted murder would be extremely dangerous for her. In their society, her word meant nothing against his. If she was wrong or if she couldn't prove it, the consequences for her would be severe. She needed to be absolutely certain before taking any action. More importantly, she needed a plan that would expose Wells without putting herself at risk. Elena began watching Wells even more carefully during his visits. She noticed that he always brought his own coffee grounds and insisted on preparing the drink himself. He never let Thomas or Elena handle the preparation. She also observed that Wells seemed particularly interested in how sick Thomas was getting. He asked pointed questions about Thomas's health and seemed pleased when Thomas mentioned feeling unwell. "Thomas, you've been looking a bit pale lately," Wells would say with false concern. "Are you sure you're taking care of yourself?" Elena realized that Wells was not just poisoning Thomas. He was also positioning himself to look innocent when Thomas eventually became too sick to work or even died. The most frightening part was how carefully planned it all seemed. Wells was slowly destroying Thomas's health while appearing to be a concerned friend and colleague. If Thomas died, people would assume it was from overwork or natural illness, but Elena had one advantage that Wells didn't know about: her grandmother's knowledge and her own sharp observation skills. She understood what was happening, and she was determined to stop it. As she watched Wells prepare another cup of poisoned coffee, Elena began forming a plan. She couldn't directly accuse Wells, but she could find a way to expose his crimes and save Thomas's life. The question was whether she could act quickly enough before the poison did permanent damage to the man who had become like family to her. Elena knew she had to act fast, but she also knew she had to be smart about it. One wrong move could cost both her and Thomas their lives. She spent sleepless nights planning how to prove what Wells was doing without putting herself in immediate danger. Her first step was to test her theory about the poisoned coffee. The next time Wells visited, Elena paid careful attention to every detail of his coffee preparation. She watched him measure the grounds, heat the water, and stir the mixture. When Wells wasn't looking, Elena managed to collect a small sample of the coffee grounds he had brought. She carefully wrapped it in a piece of cloth and hid it away for later examination. That evening, after Thomas had gone to bed feeling worse than usual, Elena conducted her own investigation. Her grandmother had taught her simple ways to test for certain poisons using common household items. She dissolved a tiny amount of the coffee grounds in water and added a few drops of vinegar, just as her grandmother had shown her years ago. Then she placed a piece of copper wire into the solution and waited. Within minutes, the copper wire began to turn black and develop a strange coating. Elena's heart raced as she recognized the reaction her grandmother had described. This was the test for arsenic, and it was clearly positive. Wells was definitely poisoning Thomas. Slowly and deliberately, Elena felt sick to her stomach as the reality hit her. This wasn't just business competition. This was attempted murder. Wells was willing to kill Thomas just to eliminate a competitor, but having proof of the poison was only the first step. Elena still needed to figure out how to stop Wells without putting herself at risk. In their society, a black woman accusing a respected white businessman of attempted murder would likely result in severe punishment for her. Regardless of the evidence, she needed a way to expose Wells that would make it impossible for him to deny or escape justice over the next few days. Elena watched Wells even more carefully. She noticed that he had a routine for his visits. He always came on Wednesday mornings, always brought the same type of coffee bag, and always insisted on making the coffee himself. Elena also realized that Wells was getting impatient. Thomas's illness was progressing slowly, and Wells seemed frustrated that his plan wasn't working faster. "Thomas, you really should see a doctor," Wells said during his next visit, but Elena could hear the false concern in his voice. "You've been looking quite unwell lately." "I've been thinking the same thing," Thomas replied weakly. "This fatigue just won't go away." Elena saw Wells's eyes light up with satisfaction. He was pleased that Thomas was getting sicker, which confirmed Elena's worst fears about his intentions. That night, Elena made a decision that terrified and determined her at the same time. She would switch the coffee. It was an incredibly risky plan, but Elena couldn't think of any other way to stop Wells while gathering the evidence she needed to expose him. She would have to time everything perfectly and hope that her plan would work. Elena spent the entire next week preparing. She bought coffee grounds that looked identical to the ones Wells always brought. She practiced switching bags quickly and quietly. Most importantly, she began secretly replacing Thomas's daily coffee with the safe version, while letting Wells continue to bring his poison supply. The key to her plan was that Wells had to be caught in the act of bringing poison, with witnesses present who could verify what they saw. Elena knew that Dr. Hayes would be the perfect witness. As the town physician, his word would carry weight, and he already respected Elena's knowledge of plant medicines. But she needed to get him to the shop at exactly the right time without arousing Wells's suspicion. Elena's opportunity came when Mrs. Patterson mentioned that her husband had been having problems with his arthritis. Elena suggested that Dr. Hayes might want to discuss some natural treatments with her, and she could arrange for him to visit the shop during his regular rounds. "Dr. Hayes, would you be able to stop by our shop Wednesday morning?" Elena asked when she saw him in town. "I'd like to discuss some herbal remedies that might help Mr. Patterson's joint pain." "That's a wonderful idea, Elena," Dr. Hayes replied. "I've been very impressed with your knowledge of traditional medicines." "What time would be convenient?" Elena calculated carefully. Wells usually arrived around 10 o'clock. "Would 9:30 work for you? We could talk before the shop gets busy." Dr. Hayes agreed, and Elena felt the first part of her plan falling into place. The next step was even riskier. Elena needed to make sure that other people would also be present when Wells made his poisoned coffee. She carefully arranged for several customers to pick up finished work on Wednesday morning, spacing their appointments so that someone would always be in the shop. Tuesday night, Elena barely slept. She went over her plan again and again, checking for anything that could go wrong. If Wells suspected what she was doing, he might change his routine or even become violent, but Elena knew that if she didn't act, Thomas would continue getting sicker until the poison eventually killed him. She couldn't let that happen to the man who had treated her with more kindness and respect than anyone else in her life. Wednesday morning arrived with perfect weather. Dr. Hayes came to the shop exactly on time, and Elena began discussing herbal treatments for arthritis. She made sure their conversation was loud enough to be clearly heard by anyone who entered the shop. At 9:45, Mrs. Patterson arrived to pick up her repaired garden tools. Elena had timed this perfectly. Knowing that Mrs. Patterson was always punctual and would stay to chat for at least 10 minutes. At exactly 10 o'clock, Wells walked through the door with his usual friendly smile and his familiar coffee bag. "Good morning, Thomas," Wells called out cheerfully. "And Dr. Hayes, what a pleasant surprise to see you here." "Good morning, Benjamin," Dr. Hayes replied. "Elena has been teaching me about traditional plant medicines. Her knowledge is quite impressive." Elena watched Wells's jaw tighten slightly at the compliment, but he maintained his friendly expression. "Well, I brought that special coffee again," Wells announced, holding up his bag. Thomas, you look like you could use something to perk you up. This was the moment Elena had been waiting for. As Wells moved toward the coffee preparation area, Elena positioned herself where she could see everything he did. Wells went through his usual routine, but Elena noticed something different this time. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small paper packet, which he quickly emptied into the coffee grounds before mixing them together. Elena's heart pounded as she realized she was watching Wells add extra poison to an already poisoned mixture. He was planning to give Thomas a much larger dose than usual. "Dr. Hayes," Elena said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I think you should see this." Wells froze, his hand still holding the empty packet. "See what, Elena?" Dr. Hayes asked, moving closer. Elena pointed directly at Wells. He just added something from his pocket to the coffee grounds, something that wasn't coffee. The shop fell, completely silent. Wells's face went pale, and his friendly expression disappeared completely. "That's ridiculous," Wells said, but his voice shook. I was just adding sugar." "Then you won't mind if Dr. Hayes examines what you added," Elena said calmly. Dr. Hayes stepped forward and looked at the coffee mixture, then at the empty packet in Wells's hand. Even without special knowledge, anyone could see that what Wells had added was not sugar. "Benjamin," Dr. Hayes said slowly, "what exactly did you just put in that coffee?" The tension in the shop was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Wells stood frozen, still holding the empty packet, his face growing redder by the second. Dr. Hayes examined the coffee mixture with growing concern, while Mrs. Patterson looked confused but alert. "Benjamin, I'm waiting for an answer," Dr. Hayes said firmly. "What did you just add to that coffee?" Wells's mind raced as he tried to find an excuse. It was it was a special sweetener. My wife makes it herself. She grinds up sugar with some herbs. Elena stepped forward calmly. "Dr. Hayes, would you like me to test what he added?" "My grandmother taught me ways to identify different substances." "That won't be necessary," Wells said quickly, his voice rising. "This is ridiculous. I don't have to prove anything to anyone." But Elena was already moving. She had prepared for this moment and knew exactly what to do. From under the counter, she pulled out a small bottle of vinegar and a piece of copper wire. "This is a simple test my grandmother showed me," Elena explained to Dr. Hayes and Mrs. Patterson. "If someone has added certain harmful substances to food or drink, this test will show it." Wells watched in growing panic as Elena prepared her test. He knew that if the arsenic was detected, his plan would be completely exposed. "You can't do that," Wells protested. "That coffee belongs to me. I won't allow you to destroy it." "If it's just coffee and sugar, then the test won't hurt anything," Elena replied logically. "But if you've added something dangerous, don't you think we should know?" Dr. Hayes nodded approvingly. "Elena is absolutely right. If there's any chance something harmful has been added, we need to check." Elena took a small sample of the coffee mixture and dissolved it in water. Then she added the vinegar and placed the copper wire in the solution. Within seconds, the copper wire began to turn black and develop a strange coating. Everyone in the shop could see the reaction happening. "What does that mean?" Mrs. Patterson asked, though her voice suggested she already suspected the answer wasn't good. "It means someone has added arsenic to the coffee," Elena said clearly. "Arsenic is a poison that can make people very sick or even kill them if they take enough of it." Dr. Hayes stared at the blackened wire in shock. "Benjamin, do you understand what this means?" "You just tried to poison Thomas with a lethal dose of arsenic." Wells's facade finally cracked completely. "You don't understand," he said desperately. "This shop is ruining my business. Thomas doesn't deserve all this success. He's just a simple blacksmith and she's just ... He pointed angrily at Elena. "She's just property. How can they be better than me?" The ugly truth was finally out in the open. Wells hadn't been trying to kill Thomas because of business competition alone. He couldn't accept that a partnership between Thomas and Elena had succeeded where his own larger operation had failed. "Benjamin Wells," Dr. Hayes said with disgust, "you are confessing to attempted murder." "It's not murder if it's just business," Wells said, but Even he seemed to realize how weak that sounded. Thomas, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally spoke up. "Benjamin, how long have you been poisoning me?" "Long enough," Wells snapped, his friendly mask completely gone now. "You should have been dead weeks ago, but somehow you kept getting stronger instead of weaker." Elena smiled slightly at that comment. Her plan to secretly replace Thomas's regular coffee with safe alternatives had been working perfectly. While Wells thought he was slowly killing Thomas, Elena had been protecting him. "The reason Thomas kept getting stronger," Elena explained, "is because I figured out what you were doing 3 weeks ago. I've been switching his daily coffee with safe coffee ever since. The only poison he's gotten is during your visits." Wells stared at Elena in shock. You knew?" "I suspected it after the second visit," Elena said. "The symptoms always got worse after you made coffee. My grandmother taught me to recognize the signs of arsenic poisoning." Dr. Hayes was shaking his head in amazement. "Elena, you probably saved Thomas's life. If he had continued consuming arsenic daily, he would have died within another month. But why didn't you just stop me from coming?" Wells demanded. Confused about why Elena had allowed his visits to continue, Elena's expression grew serious. "Because I needed proof that would convince everyone. If I had just accused you without evidence, who would have believed me? I needed witnesses to see you actually adding poison to the coffee." Mrs. Patterson gasped as she understood the full scope of what had happened. "You mean Elena planned all of this? She arranged for us to be here when Wells tried to poison Thomas?" "I had to," Elena said simply. "It was the only way to make sure justice would be done." Dr. Hayes looked at Elena with new respect. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly smart. You risked your own safety to expose a murderer?" Wells realized that his carefully planned crime had been completely turned against him by someone he had dismissed as worthless. "This is impossible," he muttered. "You're just a crippled slave girl. How could you outsmart me?" "She outsmarted you," Thomas said, his voice growing stronger. "Because she's smarter than you. She sees things you miss and cares about things you don't understand." Elena had not only saved Thomas's life, but she had done it in a way that protected herself from retaliation. By gathering witnesses and evidence, she had made it impossible for Wells to escape justice or turn the situation against her. Dr. Hayes took charge of the situation. "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to go fetch Sheriff Johnson immediately. Tell him we have a case of attempted murder with multiple witnesses." "What about the evidence?" Mrs. Patterson asked. Elena had thought of that too. "I've been saving samples of the poisoned coffee for weeks," she said, producing several small wrapped packages from a hidden compartment. "Each one is labeled with the date Wells brought it. Dr. Hayes can test them all to prove this has been going on for a long time." Wells slumped against the wall, realizing that his fate was sealed. Elena had not only stopped his murder plan, but had gathered enough evidence to ensure he would face serious consequences. "You have no idea what you've done," Wells said bitterly to Elena. "People like you aren't supposed to be smarter than people." "Like me. Maybe that's the problem," Elena replied calmly. "You spent so much time thinking about what people are supposed to be that you never bothered to see what they actually are." When Sheriff Johnson arrived, he found a clear case of attempted murder with solid evidence and multiple witnesses. Wells's confession in front of everyone made his guilt impossible to deny. As Wells was led away in handcuffs, Thomas turned to Elena with tears in his eyes. "You saved my life," he said simply. "You saved mine first," Elena replied. "When you paid $2 for me at that auction, you gave me a chance to become who I really am. Everything I did after that was just returning the favor." Dr. Hayes packed up the evidence carefully. "Elena, I hope you understand that what you accomplished here goes far beyond saving one man's life. You've shown this entire community what real intelligence and courage look like." As word of Elena's heroic actions spread through town, people began to understand that they had seriously misjudged the young woman with the limp who had cost only $2. She hadn't just assisted Thomas. She had become the true protector of their partnership. The girl everyone had dismissed as worthless had proven herself to be worth more than anyone had ever imagined. News of Wells's arrest spread through the town like wildfire. By evening, everyone knew the story of how Elena had outsmarted a would-be murderer and saved Thomas's life. But what most people didn't realize was that the danger wasn't completely over yet. Wells had been taken to the county jail, but his business partner, Raymond Carter, was still free. Carter had been quietly involved in Wells's scheme from the beginning, providing financial backing and helping to plan Thomas's slow elimination from the competition. Elena discovered this connection 3 days after Wells's arrest, when she overheard Carter talking to one of his workers behind the general store. "Wells was an idiot," Carter was saying angrily. "He should have just burned down their shop and made it look like an accident. Now everything is ruined because he couldn't handle one simple poisoning." Elena's blood ran cold as she realized that Carter was planning to finish what Wells had started, but instead of using poison, he was going to try a more direct approach. That evening, Elena shared her concerns with Thomas. "Mr. Thomas, I think we're still in danger." Carter was Wells's partner, and he's angry about what happened. Thomas looked worried. "What do you think he'll do?" "I heard him talking about burning down the shop," Elena said. "He wants to destroy everything we've built." Thomas's face grew serious. "We should tell Sheriff Johnson." "We could," Elena agreed, "but Carter is more careful than Wells was. He won't leave evidence lying around, and he won't confess in front of witnesses. We need to catch him in the act." Elena had learned from her experience with Wells that the best way to stop dangerous people was to let them reveal their true intentions where everyone could see. Over the next few days, Elena developed another plan. She knew that Carter would try to burn down the shop when no one was around to stop him or identify him. Most likely he would act on a weekend night when the shop was closed and the street was empty. Elena suggested that she and Thomas should take turns watching the shop during nighttime hours. "If Carter comes to burn us out, we need to be ready for him." Thomas agreed, but Elena had a more complex plan in mind. She wanted to catch Carter not just in the attempt, but in a way that would prove his connection to Wells's poisoning scheme. Elena spent Saturday preparing her trap. She arranged for several trusted people to be nearby when Carter made his move. Dr. Hayes agreed to stay late at his office across the street. Sheriff Johnson was convinced to patrol the area more frequently. Even Mrs. Patterson volunteered to watch from her house, which had a clear view of the blacksmith shop. Most importantly, Elena prepared evidence that would connect Carter to Wells's crimes. She had been investigating their business relationship and discovered that Carter had been supplying Wells with the arsenic used in the poisoning attempts. On Saturday night, Elena and Thomas waited in the darkened shop. They had positioned themselves where they could see anyone approaching but remain hidden themselves. Around midnight, Elena spotted a figure moving carefully down the street. The person was carrying what looked like a large container and moving directly toward their shop. "That's him," Elena whispered to Thomas. "Carter is here." They watched as Carter approached the building and began pouring liquid around the base of the walls. The strong smell of kerosene filled the air, confirming Elena's suspicions about his plan. Elena had prepared for this moment. She had arranged a series of signals that would alert their hidden allies when Carter was ready to light the fire. As Carter pulled out a match, Elena lit a lantern in the shop window. This was the signal for Dr. Hayes to light his office lamp, which would signal Sheriff Johnson to begin moving toward the shop. Carter struck his match and was about to throw it onto the kerosene when Sheriff Johnson's voice rang out in the darkness. "Raymond." Carter stopped right there. Carter spun around, still holding the lit match. He was caught red-handed with evidence of arson all around him. "This isn't what it looks like," Carter said desperately. "Really?" Sheriff Johnson replied. "Because it looks like you're about to burn down Thomas's shop." Dr. Hayes emerged from his office with a lantern, providing more light for the scene. Mrs. Patterson appeared from her house. Having witnessed the entire incident, Elena and Thomas stepped out of the shop, surprising Carter even more. "You were watching me," Carter said, his face twisted with anger. "Just like I watched Wells," Elena replied calmly. "People who plan to hurt others usually make the same kinds of mistakes." Sheriff Johnson examined the evidence around the building. Carter You're under arrest for attempted arson. And based on what I'm seeing here, you planned this very carefully, but Elena wasn't finished yet. She had more evidence to present. Sheriff Johnson, I think you should also arrest him for conspiracy in the attempted murder of Thomas. Elena said, What are you talking about? Carter demanded. Elena produced a small ledger that she had been keeping. I've been tracking the business relationship between Carter and Wells. Carter provided the money for Wells to buy the arsenic used in the poisoning attempts. She showed the sheriff her carefully documented evidence. Carter's general store sells arsenic for rat poison. Wells bought unusually large quantities over the past 6 months, always paying with money that came from Carter's accounts. Dr. Hayes examined Elena's evidence and nodded approvingly. This documentation is very thorough. It clearly shows a pattern of purchases that matches the timeline of Thomas's poisoning. Carter's face went pale as he realized that Elena had built a case against him just as strong as the one that had convicted Wells. You can't prove I knew what Wells was doing with the arsenic, Carter protested. Actually, I can, Elena said. She pulled out another piece of evidence. I found a letter in Wells's shop after his arrest. It's from you, discussing the best ways to eliminate the competition and mentioning that slow methods work better than fast ones. Sheriff Johnson read the letter and shook his head. Carter, this letter is signed by you and clearly discusses the plan to poison Thomas. The trap was complete. Elena had not only caught Carter in the act of attempted arson, but had also connected him to the original murder plot. How did you know I would try to burn down the shop tonight? Carter asked. Defeated. Because I've been watching you just like I watched Wells, Elena explained. You've been angry and desperate since Wells was arrested. People in that state usually do something reckless. I just had to be ready when you did. As Carter was led away to join Wells in jail, Thomas looked at Elena with amazement. You did it again, he said. You saved us both. We saved each other, Elena replied. That's what partners do. Dr. Hayes shook his head in wonder. Elena, you've now stopped 2 separate murder attempts with nothing but careful observation and smart planning. That's extraordinary. The crowd that had gathered to watch Carter's arrest began to understand that they were witnessing something remarkable. The young woman who had cost only $2 at an auction had become the protector of their community. Elena, Mrs. Patterson sighed, I owe you an apology. When Thomas first bought you, I thought he had made a terrible mistake. Now I see that he made the smartest purchase anyone has ever made. Elena smiled at the compliment, but her real satisfaction came from knowing that Thomas was safe and their partnership could continue to grow. As they cleaned up the kerosene that Carter had poured around their shop, Thomas realized that Elena had not just saved his life twice. She had also proven that real strength and intelligence could come in forms that most people never expected to recognize. The girl everyone had underestimated had become the most valuable person in their community, and her worth could never again be measured in dollars. 6 months after Carter's arrest, the entire atmosphere of the town had changed. What started as laughter at Thomas's foolish $2 purchase had transformed into something much deeper, genuine respect for both his judgment and Elena's remarkable abilities. The blacksmith shop had become more than just a business. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people looked beyond surface appearances to see real worth. Elena's reputation had spread far beyond their small town. People traveled from neighboring counties just to meet the young woman who had outsmarted 2 would-be murderers and saved a man's life through pure intelligence and courage. Dr. Hayes had been so impressed with Elena's knowledge of traditional medicines that he began officially consulting with her on difficult cases. Elena, I have a patient with a condition that modern medicine isn't helping, he would say. Do you know any traditional remedies that might work? Elena's grandmother's teachings had proven invaluable to the medical practice. Her understanding of plant-based treatments helped several patients who had given up hope of recovery. The most significant change, however, was in how the legal system had begun to recognize Elena's contributions. Judge Crawford, who presided over Wells and Carter's trials, had made an unprecedented decision. This court recognizes that Elena's testimony and evidence were crucial in preventing multiple serious crimes, Judge Crawford announced during the final sentencing. Her intelligence and dedication to justice have protected this entire community. More importantly, the judge had made a legal ruling that shocked everyone in the courtroom. Due to Elena's extraordinary service to this community and her proven abilities, this court officially recognizes her right to provide expert testimony in future legal proceedings. This meant that Elena's word would carry the same weight as any other expert witness, regardless of her social status. It was an almost unheard-of recognition in their time and place. Thomas had been working on something even more significant. Behind the scenes, he had been quietly using his growing influence and the money from their successful business to pursue Elena's legal freedom. "Elena," Thomas said one evening as they were closing the shop, "I have something important to tell." Elena looked up from organizing the day's earnings, curious about Thomas's serious tone. "I've been talking with lawyers about your legal status," Thomas continued. "With Judge Crawford's support and the testimony of everyone whose lives you've touched, I've been able to arrange for your official freedom." Elena stared at Thomas in disbelief. "What do you mean?" Thomas pulled out a set of legal documents. "These are your freedom papers? You're no longer anyone's property? You're a free woman with all the rights that come with that status." Elena's hands trembled as she took the papers. After years of being owned by others, the concept of true freedom felt almost impossible to believe. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you give up ownership of someone who makes your business so successful?" Thomas smiled warmly. "Because you were never really my property, Elena. You were always your own person. I just had to make the legal system catch up with what was already true." Tears filled Elena's eyes as she realized what this meant. She was free to leave if she wanted, free to start her own business, free to make her own choices about her future. "What happens now?" she asked. "That's entirely up to you," Thomas replied. "But I hope you'll consider staying on as my business partner, not because you have to, but because you want to." Elena looked around the shop that had become her home, at the tools she had learned to use, and at the man who had seen her worth when no one else could. "I'd like that very much," she said. Thomas reached into his desk and pulled out another document. "Then let's make it official." The paper was a legal partnership agreement that would make Elena a co-owner of the blacksmith business. She would have equal say in all decisions and equal share in all profits. "Thomas, this is too much," Elena protested. "No, it's exactly right," Thomas insisted. "This business succeeded because of both of our contributions. The partnership should reflect that reality." Word of Elena's freedom and business partnership spread quickly through the community. The reactions were mixed, but the overwhelming response was positive. Mrs. Patterson was one of the first to congratulate Elena. "I'm proud to know you," she said simply. "You've shown all of us what real character looks like." Dr. Hayes offered Elena an additional opportunity. "I'd like you to consider teaching some of your traditional medicine knowledge to other healers in the region. Your grandmother's wisdom shouldn't be lost." Elena agreed to begin teaching workshops on traditional plant medicines, sharing knowledge that had been passed down through generations. The most touching response came from the younger people in the community. Children who had heard stories of Elena's courage began approaching her with their own problems and questions. "Miss Elena," a young boy named David asked one day, "the other kids say I'm too small to be good at anything. How do I prove them wrong?" Elena knelt down to the boy's level. "You don't prove them wrong by trying to be something you're not," she said gently. "You prove them wrong by being excellent at what you are. Find your own strengths and develop them." Elena had become an unofficial advisor to many young people who felt overlooked or underestimated by society. The success of Thomas and Elena's partnership had also inspired other business owners to reconsider their own assumptions about worth and capability. Several other shops began hiring people they might have previously overlooked, focusing on skills and character rather than just physical strength or social status. Elena's influence on the community extended beyond business and medicine. She had become a voice for careful thinking and fair treatment when disputes arose. Between neighbors, people often asked Elena to help mediate. Her ability to see all sides of a problem and find practical solutions had earned her a reputation as a wise counselor. One year after the auction, Thomas and Elena hosted a celebration at their shop. They invited everyone who had supported them during their difficult times and everyone who had learned to see past their initial prejudices. Judge Crawford attended the celebration and made a speech that surprised everyone. A year ago, most of us learned an important lesson about the difference between price and value, he said. Thomas paid $2 for Elena, and many people laughed at what they saw as a poor investment. The judge paused and looked directly at Elena, but Elena's true value could never be measured in money. Her intelligence, courage, and character have enriched this entire community in ways that no amount of gold could equal. Elena stood up to respond to the judge's kind words. A year ago, I was angry and scared, she began. I thought my life would always be defined by what other people thought I was worth. She looked around at the faces of people who had become her friends and supporters. But I learned that real worth comes from what you do with the opportunities you're given. Thomas gave me a chance to show what I could do, and all of you gave me the chance to prove that first impressions aren't always right. Elena paused and smiled. I hope that everyone who hears our story remembers that true value often comes in unexpected packages. The next time you meet someone who seems different or limited, take a closer look. You might discover something wonderful that everyone else has missed. As the celebration continued into the evening, Thomas reflected on the incredible journey that had begun with 2 crumpled dollar bills and a crowd's mocking laughter. The girl who had limped onto that auction platform had transformed not just his business, but his entire understanding of what made people valuable. Elena had saved his life, protected their community, and proven that wisdom and courage could triumph over prejudice and hatred. Looking back, Thomas knew that those $2 had been the best investment anyone had ever made. Not because of the money it had earned, but because of the lives it had changed and the lessons it had taught about the true meaning of human worth.